Thanks a bunch, Jill. Good morning, y'all. It's great to have, I really appreciate everybody putting in their chat notes to say where they're from, to get a sense of where everybody's from. New Jersey, Serbia, California. And I'm really pleased to be here to talk about what we've been doing in California with respect to integrating tree care and jobs with the urban forest nonprofit community. To give you a little background on California Relief, for those of you who are not familiar with us, Relief was formed in 1989. We are the Urban Forestry Volunteer Coordinator for the state of California, and we were formed when 10 of the nonprofits in California got together and said we needed somebody to bring all these nonprofits working individually in their towns together for peer-to-peer learning. Our three missions, you could say, are education, advocacy, and grants. And this, what you see on the screen right now, is an example of what we call our NASCAR letter. Using the network of, by the way, the network that we have in California is almost 100 member organizations, which is one of the largest groupings of nonprofits supporting urban forestry in the country. It is the largest in any one state. On this screen that you see, the NASCAR letter, and this is only part of the screen, we have had over 140 organizations signing on to our letters to the state government supporting urban forestry grants. So on here, you'll see that it's not only our city forest and tree people and Richmond Trees, but it's also Audubon and Move LA. So we also partner with other groups such as environmental groups and other natural resources groups to make urban forestry happen in our state. This kind of support was how we were able to advocate for funding from Cap and Trade, and helped us advocate for over $20 million in urban forestry in 17-18, which was in that year's budget and represented the largest single state one-year allocation for urban forestry in U.S. history. Next page. So community activism is what we do. And when I first joined the urban forest world, everybody talked about us as being environmentalists, and that's true. But really, I think that we are community development organizations. We're here to better the community with trees and improve how people live with trees for all the reasons you all already know about why trees are critical to human health and well-being and the economy, et cetera. So any group that wants to be a part of our network, they either plant trees or they educate the community about why trees are important in urban areas. And so the other thing that we do too is we provide pass-through grants to these groups. We seek funding through government grants in California as well as through private funding to be able to pass through those funds to the smaller nonprofits to keep them growing and going. Then you probably have all heard of Cap and Trade and how it was a game changer in California. And when Jill mentioned that I came on in 2014, it was right after we'd gotten the first funding from Cap and Trade. So that was very exciting, and we had worked with environmental justice groups to come to this point. What was also really interesting, what you see in front of you is the CalEnviro screen. This is the latest version 3.0, but back then it was 1.0. And this was how some of the recipients of the grants were going to be defined, because there was additional legislation that said disadvantaged communities had to receive a certain portion of the funding. The portion that was mentioned was 10% directly in disadvantaged communities and 25% benefiting. Then what ended up, and the reason for this, by the way, is we all have communities like this across the United States where some people have trees and some people don't. What you see here is West Oakland, which is known as the flats of Oakland. Piedmont is the hills above Oakland. And the people that live in the neighborhood on top tend to be people of color and have less funding, less financial resources than the people who live on the hills. So this is what we were expecting when we went into these grants. And then CAL FIRE received urban forestry funding. What was news to us that year was that 100% of the funding was going to go to DACs for urban forestry grants. And like I said, that was right after I started. So suddenly we needed to talk more about how are we going to be successful in this, because as with many of the urban forest nonprofits across the country, most of them were kind of white middle class group. and suddenly we were going to be planting in neighborhoods that did not have as many resources, did not have as much support. As a matter of fact, one of the senior consultants in the legislature was talking to me, and he was worried about whether the trees were going to survive. And these are supposed to be trees that capture carbon and keep it for a long period of time to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So next, I was trying to figure out how to tell this story, and I thought this was really a journey of talking to a lot of different people about how do we handle this. So I'm going to show you a few of the people that I talked to and what I learned as we went along. So Kemba Shakur, Executive Director of Urban Relief in Oakland, one of our few nonprofits that was run by a person of color, talked to me right after I came on board, and she said, Cindy, you know, everybody loves trees. Trees are great, but really our communities need jobs. And that was good to know. It was also a little bit of a kind of moment, because having worked for Sacramento Tree Foundation beforehand, what I knew was even a larger nonprofit like Sacramento Tree Foundation really could not provide that many jobs to a community. And certainly with grant funding, you didn't always know if you were going to have money for people after a grant was ended. So it was a bit cyclical. So nonprofits are not necessarily the best source of jobs. We can do training and other things, but we don't necessarily provide jobs. So I don't know, 6 months later, I was at the Sustainable Urban Forestry Council meeting in DC, and Mark Garvin of the Tree Care Industry Association, which I'd never really even heard of before, got up, and he started talking, and he said that there was this dire shortage of people working in the tree care industry. And what also caught my attention is because they're a nonprofit, and they said they were taking $1.5 million out of their reserves to address this situation. And then he said that the industry is filled with multimillionaires who started out with pickup trucks, and I thought, well, hey, we've got a lot of pickup trucks in California. So that was what I would call a V8 moment. And it seemed like it was just a really good convergence of a lot of things happening. California cap and trade funding, the TCIA sector partnerships that were being set up, also getting to know more about our local employers like West Coast Arborist and Arborwell and Davie, and knowing that they all had training programs. And I think the other thing that was mentioned is that where do most of the tree care companies work? They work in urban areas, which is exactly where the population was that we were concerned about. Especially with having cap and trade funding, where we have to keep the trees alive, making sure that the ongoing maintenance is going to happen is critical for us. So the next person I chatted with, by the way, disadvantaged community. Thank you very much for spelling that out in the chat box. And a disadvantaged community was defined by 20 factors. It wasn't simply whether you were low income. It was also had a lot to do with whether or not there was a lot of pollution in the neighborhood, water pollution, air pollution from trucks, et cetera, or the port, as well as level of education, et cetera. So in talking to more people about this, I ended up talking to Oscar Sanchez, who is with Tree Care LA, but he used to be with Tree People. And when we were talking about tree care jobs, Oscar said, you know, he said, when I worked at Tree People, we would go teach these kids that were in 7th grade and 8th grade and high school students on how to plant trees, but we never talked to them about the fact that this was a career that they could have, and that it paid well, and that it was steady work. And everybody else is also telling us that you need to be talking to kids in middle school about what they're going to do. You can't just be talking to them when they hit the last year of high school. So Oscar says he does several career day events at elementary schools, and he tells them, you know, you can get paid to climb trees. So that was when I started thinking, okay, this is where we get this circle, where if we're planting trees in neighborhoods and we have tree planting volunteers and we talk to them about tree care jobs, and that they get tree care jobs, then suddenly what Ray Trethewey at Sacramento Tree Foundation called the tree care literacy of the neighborhood rises up. Because not only is it volunteers talking about it, it's people that have jobs, and they'll talk to their friends and relatives, and suddenly that'll also help the value of trees in the neighborhood. So that was my vision. And if the whole neighborhood is caring about this, this also just helps as far as community care and the community caring about itself. After hearing Mark Garvin talk, I immediately went up to him and said, okay, what are you doing in California? And we want to do Northern California and Southern California. And he said, well, we just hired Bridget Orrick from Wisconsin, and she's going to be taking care of this. So I got to know Bridget, and that's when I heard the term sector partnerships, which is where you had to make sure you had the employers involved when you set up these programs at the community college, because employers had to be happy with the program to make sure that they were going to be willing to hire the people that came out of it. She told a kind of a cautionary tale about they'd had problems with that with the solar installation training program that had been done. So what we also heard, I heard recently in talking to the Tree Care Industry Association, is now community colleges will not develop curriculum around a program unless they have commitment from the employers. So this is an important mutual relationship. And that means that the spectrum of opportunities for training has a whole list where you can start with them being volunteers in the nonprofits and starting to learn a little bit about it. Some of our nonprofits are starting to do pre-apprenticeship programs, like Urban Relief is working on that in Oakland, and then you can move to the idea of either a certificate program in a community college or an associate degree, and then possibly move forward on to business. So this Arborist Career Pathway is what Tree Care Industry Association developed and Bridget shared. If you look at this, you'll see that the entry-level ground operations worker is at $13, and this is a nationwide number system here, so $13 to $16.71. I know in California, my son just got hired by a tree care company, and the starting wage was $15.50. It depends on the town, but that's a lot better than the minimum wage, which is $10 for most places in California. So this offers stability, and it also offers advancement as witnessed by this pathway developed by TCIA. It's hard for you to see, but this will be available later that you could go to become a tree climber, a plant health care technician, and these are all increases in salary as you go along, and you can see that going up the side. Also on this, it says urban forester or city arborist, and I know we're going to have some discussion about that with Susan's research on what are the entry-level jobs if you studied urban forestry, and how does that connect with city arborist. I'd also like to throw into the mix that urban forestry and urban planners are probably a good mix as well. Certainly from my perspective in urban forestry, I like the idea that we will have enough dirt for trees, and that is what urban planners can help us do. All right. Just to give you an idea that the Tree Care Industry Association has created this website, outdoorscareer.org, and they have this brochure, which I think addresses the idea that people that are a bit risk takers like this field, especially since when you start talking to tree care people, they talk about the fact that you have to be very safety conscious, but be willing to go up trees. And then Andy Trotter, Vice President with West Coast Arborist, we invited several of the tree care industry to our last nonprofit retreat in Oakland a year ago to talk about what are they looking for when they want to hire, and to make a personal connection between the nonprofits and the tree care companies so that we could set up a pipeline literally and say, look, we've got people here that we've worked with. We'd like to see if they can work with you for a steady job after they'd volunteered with the nonprofit. Steady pay and health care benefits, and they'll train you. The employers did emphasize reliability, something that is not always a given sometimes for people in underserved resource communities, but we have ways of working around that, such as partnering with conservation corps is a strong strategy, because conservation corps, like LA Conservation Corps, told us that their role is to prepare young people with the skills needed to hold down a steady job. This is a snapshot of our website right now, where we have a green jobs page, and we're trying to connect people from our nonprofits to the employers, literally putting the names. Here's A+ Trees, and here's who you should contact. And Arborwell, Davie, West Coast Arborists. These were the groups that came to our meeting in Oakland. And we're encouraging all of our nonprofits to set up relationships in their hometown. As part of this program, where we were involved in working with Bridget Orrick and Laura Forlin at Merritt College, Merritt College was the first one in California, and Laura Forlan, who is with the Landscape and Horticulture Department, has done a fantastic job of driving this program through the Merritt College system to make it happen. And this is one of the flyers or handouts that was created to make sure that people knew that this existed and to try and attract people to this community of jobs. So as far as potential places to find new employees, one of the things that were coming out in these discussions were, that most kids are college bound, or a lot of kids nowadays in high schools are being told to go to college, that there's not even any more discussion about trades, and how do we address that? And talking to Merritt College said that a lot of the community colleges have found the same issue, and so they are doing more vocational programs because the high schools are not. The other idea that we've already talked about is connect with your local urban forest nonprofit, if you're a tree care company or vice versa, so that we can set up this pipeline that will help the entire community. Veterans, Alex Violta at the LA Conservation Corps is a veteran, and he has spoken a couple times and said, if you want somebody to do a really tough job, hire a vet, as well as work with the Conservation Corps. Inner city youth in urban areas where tree care companies work. And then women. A shout out to the fact that this field needs more women, and that technology can conceivably be leveling the playing field or just changing how people perceive the work. So moving on, one of the things that comes up is how do we attract new employees? How do you attract women? How do you attract people of color or low-income people? I wasn't sure if you could tell on the last slide, but this is a woman of color in that picture. Some of the work we've been doing has shown that if you want to attract people, you need to show in your outreach materials that the place is familiar and looks like them or looks like acceptable to them. So then the next, in working in this field a little bit more, the question comes, how do we give a lift to new types of employees? In working on this topic for a couple of years, it's become clear that, for example, in California, a lot of the tree care crews are Latino, and that's probably true in Texas as well, but how many of them are in upper management? How do we set up support structures to promote new types of employees into management and potentially ownership? I also want to point out something else we've learned in the nonprofit world is that when we first started working with quote-unquote disadvantaged communities, which is a term that a lot of people in California don't like, but because it was put into statute with the cap and trade laws, that is the official word we have to use. The other way we talk about it is people who come from different backgrounds have different perspectives, and that sets you up with innovation, which was discussed earlier in this conversation when Lisa was talking about NUCFAC. Studies are showing that diversifying who works for you improves innovation, improves economics, improves community building. So change the paradigm that we're not just out here to help people who are quote-unquote in those disadvantaged communities, but we're here to help the entire community because this is best for all of us. So the elephant in the room is change. And this is really familiar to us because 4 years ago, we started realizing that we faced the same issue, that the urban forest nonprofit community, like the tree care community, has got concerns about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's probably a little bit different where there are a lot of people from the Latino population who are hired, but that's not the same as full inclusion. So this particular report, the State of Diversity in Environmental Organizations, there's a link on our website and you can find it. What's fascinating about it is it talked about the environmental groups and how they said they were going to try and diversify for the last 20 years, and then they haven't really done anything. And the report studied this and found that really they haven't changed at all because what they do is they hire from word of mouth. They hire people they know. And if you'd been reading some of the articles that happened around the time of Ferguson, you would have seen The Atlantic in 2014 noted the lack of diversity in the informal or social networks of Caucasian Americans. where Caucasian Americans, 91% of their network is also Caucasian, or 9% is not the same, where in fact fully 75% of whites have entirely white social networks without any minority presence. This is different if you look at Black Americans who associate with 65% of the same race, or Hispanic Americans where it's 46%, meaning if you're only hiring people you know, you're not hiring diversity, and you're not checking out other communities that could be helpful to you. So we started down this path, and it was, we had some trainings, we had people come speak to us about this, and it was eye-opening as somebody who comes from middle America. First we started talking about environmental justice, and then we had training on cultural competency. We heard that we needed to talk about diversity, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then at one of our talks, one of our network members, Leo Buck from Common Vision, who is white, came up to me and said, Cindy, you can't just stop here. You have to go on and talk about the deeper issues, and you have to talk about racial justice and systemic racism, which was frankly quite scary as a concept. But it is something that needs to be recognized if you're going to start working in neighborhoods where there is a different balance of power. And systemic racism is real. If you look around, you will be able to admit that. Sometimes, and it's true at all levels, where everybody is racist. Even though a Latino person can be racist against another group because the culture is racist. As somebody said, the analogy is it's like the fish swimming in the water, and you don't recognize what the water is. So I'm going to scoot through the last couple of slides. Ask yourself, what's the definition of racism? Take 2 seconds. Ask yourself what that is. If you're, the two perspectives that are typically the two responses are, if you're a person, a white person, Caucasian, you usually think it's prejudice. If you are a person of color, you think it's all about power. And for me, that was an aha moment as a woman, because I thought, oh yeah, that makes complete sense. So it's a long and winding road, and this is not something easy to digest or to open your mind to. It's really uncomfortable. It's difficult. It's hard to accept new perspectives and to face the patterns that are in our communities, and that the demographics in the U.S. are changing quickly. The good news is that we can address this, and I believe, you know, this, by the way, this is a picture from China. And you know, the Chinese have a saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So you just have to take a single step. And part of that is educating yourself. But the ISA is taking steps to become more inclusive. As a matter of fact, at the ISA Industry Workforce Summit in Charlotte in May, at the very end of the summit, there was a visual raise your hand poll was taken on what is the one issue that you would work on if you could after this 2-day summit with 40 people from around the country. The first issue that they said was apprenticeships. And then the facilitator said, okay, put that on the table. What is the one other issue that you believe we should be focusing on? And they chose diversity and inclusion. So it's good to hear that we are going to be making strides in this. As far as resources, feel free to call anytime. Here's some tree care jobs resources if you want to know about what's happening at Merritt College. You've got the link at the top. I'm probably not using the pointer. You've got this for Merritt College. Outside Careers is the one from Tree Care Industry Association. You can also go to our page, which talks about green jobs. We also, at California Relief, we have a resources and diversity page, which has some of the information that I've talked about today. And I think even more importantly, echoing what I said earlier, McKinsey shows, a report shows that there's significant improvement in financial improvement and performance at groups that are diverse and how they foster innovation. Thank you very much for your time.